across, and even last week, if some of us have been noticing, it's an entire week of Indian ensembles play that happened in Rangashankara, from Hayavadana to Kaumadi to different plays that have been traveling. And bringing the conversation further is what happens in a playwright's mind, what happens in the process that goes through a playwright. And in India has been a heritage of writers, and one of it has been traditional, conventional writers who sometimes have been forgotten over time, and there's so much that we can look at them. And introducing to you Abhishek Majumdar, who's going to take us through the next 1 hour through his process and open us to a beautiful world of writing for plays. Introducing Abhishek Majumdar.
First of all, I would like to thank once again Atta Galata and Tahato for inviting me for the second time to this wonderful conference which happens every year. Much required to have such formal adda, so to say, between people, so that we can all talk about what we view, how we view it, how we make the stuff that we make. Last year I was here to talk about a play called Kaumadi, which is made by an Indian ensemble. And this year the provocation was to talk about the process that a playwright goes through, or what are the various processes that playwrights often go through before they create, or while they are creating their work. And I thought we'll sort of divide this into two halves, because there were two parallel propositions. One was to talk about playwriting process in general, and the other was to talk about more sort of personal anecdotes and ideas and histories and so on and so forth. I find the former far more interesting. So I will start with a kind of presentation which looks at playwriting processes, which will take about 30-35 minutes, and then we'll have about 20-25 minutes for Q&A and anything that the audience would like to throw up in terms of comments, suggestions, feedback about what you see, any questions, anything that I might have missed and you want to add, that as well, and of course any questions. Okay, shall we begin? Can we go to the first slide? So at one point of time in my life, I went to a management college, so I had this ridiculous habit of preparing PowerPoint presentations for everyone. So this is one such thing that I've imbibed from that college. And those things don't come up on time. It's been the same for about 12 years. Okay, and we also know in management colleges how to fill time. So basically what this presentation is about is to look at how many different kinds of processes are there. It's not an exhaustive list, but it's kind of an indicative. Because there are some questions which often come up when people start writing plays or playwrights are asked in any kind of conference or seminar, which is, firstly, at what stage does the playwright come in? We know of playwrights who have written plays and then directors have taken it and repertories have performed it with actors. We know of situations where it has been a devised play with no playwright. We know of scenarios where a play has been devised and there has been a playwright inside it. We know of scenarios where there are novels which have been adapted to the stage either by the playwright before rehearsal or by the playwright during rehearsal. So there are so many different places at which the playwright comes in. And part of this presentation is to look at a journey through the major processes that exist. It's not exhaustive but indicative. A disclaimer is that every playwright more or less has a different process. So there is no real formula, but there are some things which playwrights do use, some techniques, some methods, some ways of thinking, which can be common. The other thing is that no two plays by the same playwright is written by the same process, more often than not. I mean, what happens is by the time a playwright moves to their third or fourth play, depending on what the content is, what the scenario is, the process for that play needs to be very different from the process for anything else that the playwright might have used earlier to create his or her own work. I have tried to move between some playwriting traditions, but not covered in detail the African tradition, the Latin American tradition, the Chinese and the Russian tradition. Those are very distinct traditions. We can talk about it when we start having our conversation. Okay, so let's start talking about process and where does the playwright fit in. Since I'm a Bengali, I have this habit of connecting many things to football, so I'll start by doing that. Okay, so that's my favorite midfield player, Zabi. And the reason why I have this slide up here is to understand that theatre is a team sport. It's not an individual thing. So the difference between, I think, a playwright and maybe some other kind of writer is that a playwright is not writing. Is always writing. You put it this way: is always writing for a team. They are not writing for for themselves alone. And that team comprises of lots of people with different skills, with different abilities, and very often what one writes, who one writes for, depends on the context that the playwright is in. And I'll try and elaborate that. The important thing about talking about this midfielder is that if you look at his statistics, he's not the guy who scores the maximum number of goals. He scores 10 goals. But he has possession 101 times. There are 952 times he has the final third passes and so on and so forth. So for those of us who are not football geeks, the point really is that the playwright is not the person who is creating the production. So in my opinion, if the playwright takes this burden on himself or herself very early on, that I am writing a production, it's kind of unnecessary. What the playwright is really writing is this thing which will become a production. So the playwright has to be aware of this, that okay, I'm working on an idea, I'm working on a theme, but I have to make the right passes so that people can go ahead and create that production that I have in my head, right? So let's go through a bit chronologically. Let's start with Bhas, the great sort of, ancient Indian playwright, known to have written some of the earliest plays of our country. What is very interesting about Bhas is, of course, very little is known of him. What we know of him is primarily through Kalidasa's notes on him, Kalidasa's dedication to Bhas about the plays, when Kalidasa wrote his own plays. What is interesting are two things about Bhas. We don't know much about the time he lived in. We do not know what context exactly did he work for. Did he have a company of actors? Did he write for a company? Did he cast people and did he direct? Was there a concept of a director? We do not conclusively know this. But what we know for sure is that he wrote some of the first tragedies. So he wrote Urubangam, in which Duryodhana is the hero. And it's kind of radical if you imagine a time when all the plays, the Sanskrit plays which talked about the Mahabharata, were eulogizing the Pandavas, and one would never really think of writing something that would be favorable to Duryodhana. Now at that time, to think of something like this was quite radical, right? And most of the plays of that period, whether it is Bhasa's plays, whether it is other plays in the 8th century like the Uttar Ramayana and so on and so forth, were already multilingual plays. So the playwright had to know more than one language. Invariably, I mean, it's not a new conversation about multilingualism in the theatre at all, especially in this in the subcontinent. Because typically in what we call a Sanskrit play, the upper caste men would all speak Sanskrit. Some of the women would, but most women and the lower caste men would not speak Sanskrit. They would speak Prakrit, or in later, post-Buddhist times, they would speak Pali, and the others would speak Sanskrit. So the playwright necessarily would need to have a sense of meter, a sense of development in more than one languages. Also would need to be able to work within two different kinds of meter to be able to write their plays. And this learning was provided in the education system of that time, this kind of multilingual learning. So that would be intrinsic to the process of the playwright. If you move to Kalidasa, primarily a poet, we are also talking about a time where most playwrights were poets. it was understood that one would have to be a poet to be a playwright, even if that person is not anything else. And this tradition continued in the West for a very long time. We know for sure that in Shakespeare's time, the epic poem was really the most sought after form and not the dramatic play. Right? So his was more like a commercial venture which did all those great plays, whereas the respected venture was the epic poem. And in India you see that at the time of Kalidasa and his contemporaries. So great skills in poetry. The other thing to understand about his process is that the moment you read a classical playwright who doesn't write conflict but who writes praise, like praise for rain and lovers and this kind of stuff, it more or less means that that person is a court playwright. The moment you get sponsorship, you stop writing tragedy. Right? So you write stuff which helps the king, and the king's lover is away, and that is the greatest crisis on this planet. So there's a lot of that during Kalidasa's time. Different process, sponsorship leads to that. Next. Aristotle, we talk about Aristotle in terms of the Greek tradition, which in a way has found its way into the entire European canon, including Chekhov and various other, just name the playwright, basically looking at the Aristotelian idea of playwriting. Very different set of skills and processes required during Aristotle's time. Aristotle was a mathematician, a man of government, a man of philosophy. Playwriting was something he did on like Saturday evening between 5 and 7. It wasn't his main thing, right? And he in fact thought of playwriting as practical philosophy. Like the people who just do not get philosophy, okay, come and watch a play, and then we'll make it simple. There'll be some guy who's dying, and it's just kind of make it clear. And very, very strong with mathematics. So if you look at Aristotelian plays, they are structurally extremely consistent, and it's very mathematical, his structure of writing, which is not something you will find in many other traditions. And of course we know his book Poetics, Aristotelian Poetics, which looks at the build of a play, the whole 3-act, 7-act, 5-act structures come out of Aristotelian poetic times. What is very interesting is, of course, poetics has made its way into American playwriting, British playwriting, so on and so forth. But if you read Greek tragedies, you will find many, many more Greek plays. You'll find many more tragedies than comedies. Also, you will find that tragedies have ensembles of 21, 23, 27. Comedies will more or less have ensembles of 13, 11, odd numbers. Even numbers make terrible ensembles, and people just bump into each other on stage. So 13, 11, so on and so forth. And the great reason for this is that the Greeks had this competition, of plays. And the prize money for tragedies was just much bigger than the prize money for the comedies. So playwrights even then used to write for awards. And clearly, the award decided how many tragedies and how many comedies would be written. And it was also a great time when patrons used to consider it a privilege to support plays. So there would be like 10 plays, say, this season, but there are like the whole city of Athens wants to produce it. So they would select patrons. So you can do it this year. You cannot. You're not very sound. Maybe he can produce it. So you would actually get to choose people. And the budgets would be different for the tragedies and the comedies. The budget for the tragedy would generally be much larger. So despite all the profound stuff that is there around the Greek plays, it really also boils down to the prize money and how much money was the producer put in what kind of ensemble into the theatre. If we move away from there and we go to another tradition, which is the Japanese tradition, which has created great plays classically, was this man called Zeami. Now the great thing about Zeami is Zeami wrote a treatise for no theatre, which is very similar in some ways to our Natya Shastra. It's like a parallel, right? And Zeami does this incredible thing because he writes how the stage should be, what kind of people are witness to the play. Witness to a play are characters in no theatre. So they are kind of an audience within within the play. In every no play, there are witnesses who are part of the play. But also, what he did is he strangely ended up using something like Aristotelian poetics, much before Aristotle, but he used it within movement sequences. So if you think of an Aristotelian play and you say there is a build of three, something happens, there is a rise of tension, then something moves forward on how to resolve it, and then there is either a tragic or a dramatic conclusion. Ziami wrote this stuff for movements. So if a no actor is plucking a flower to give his beloved, just that action of plucking one flower would have a build of three, which he would have written into the play. So the intention and the movement would take that much of dramatic understanding to be able to pluck that flower and give it. So no wonder no plays and kabuki plays last for 7 days and so on and so forth, because plucking the flower takes a really, really long time in that stuff. A very, very solid tradition of playwriting is in the Kudiyattam, which is obviously known as the world's oldest mime form. There is a lot that can be said about Kudiyattam, but I'll cut to the chase about playwriting. What is very exciting about Kudiyattam is essentially the Kudiyattam plays are one portion of a classical Sanskrit play. So let's say you have a play which is a full length, something about Ramayana, and you take only Bali's death. So you have a Kudiyattam play called Balivadam. Now in Balivadam, that is being elaborated, that Bali's death is being elaborated over, say, 4 nights or 9 nights, depending on what kind of performance it is. I mean, I'm talking about those days. Now you also have, unfortunately, Kudiyattam performances in the evening in Leela Palace, which lasts for about 20 minutes. But generally speaking, it's a much longer format. And in Kudiyattam, there are 2 texts. One is called the Atta Prakaram, and the other is called the Kramadipika. Kramadipika is the Krama, so the chronology of events in the play. So the Krama is like, the first day Bali will meet Angad, and they will meet Ram. The second day, Ram and Sugriv will meet Tara, and the third day this will happen, just the basic plotting. This is fixed. This is a fixed text. You cannot change this. Then there is the second text, which is the Atta Prakaram. Atta Prakaram is the text of the actor. So for each actor, there is a different Atta Prakaram. So the Atta Prakaram of Bali is different from the Atta Prakaram of Sugriv, is different from the Atta Prakaram of Ram. So if I am playing Bali and she is playing Sugriv, we will have 2 different texts. Now we can improvise with this text. So she will come in on that day saying that, okay, we are going to meet playing Balivadam. She will do a certain number of things, but she can improvise, and I can improvise with mine. So it's kind of a classical format, which is the best of writing and devising, within the structure. And Kudiyattam is very strong with that. And Kudiyattam actors, the text itself also includes a meter. So everybody also has to learn that meter. So you can improvise, but you can't blabber, you can't rant. You have to do it within a meter. There are some very good offshoots of this. One is in Madurai. Madurai has this form of theatre where it's kind of a folk form, where they have a club, a big hall like this, and different actors have put up their calendars, right? And the manager of, say, suppose somebody in a village wants Balivadam, not Kudiyattam, this is a more folk form. The manager will come and he'll say, okay, I want Balivadam on 20th in my village. So I need these 5 characters. That guy should know how many characters are required in Balivadam. So he'll go and see, okay, Abhishek, he plays he often plays Sugriv. He is free on 20th. So he'll tick mark and write down the name of the village. Then he'll go to some other site and he'll see, okay, this one plays Ram and he is free on the 20th. So he'll tick mark and go away. Now all of us will just see our calendars lined up on the day in that village, and we'll meet each other and say, which play is it? And so he'll come and say, we are doing Balivadam. Okay, fine, we know how to do Balivadam, come, let's do it. Right? And what is interesting is sometimes people will write on the calendar that if she acts, I am not going to act. If he acts, I am not there. So the manager has to be a very good scheduling guy. He has to also know. Then sometimes what happens, you make a mistake. You know, like Bali and Sugriv have landed up and they are brother-in-laws. So they have a problem. So they will start improvising. You know, they'll start saying things like, yeah, I know, you know, got it now, like, you know, move on. And then they will sort of move on. So there are a lot of these folk traditions which have different playwriting processes, which are derivatives of the classical formats. Okay, then we come to Shakespeare. Much abused, much loved, much liked, everything. There is this whole, the British, I don't know why they are fretting so much about whether he was one man or many men, or whether he was a woman. In India, 90% of the times we don't know who these people were they there, were they not there, how many of them were there. But the British are very worried about this for some reason. Good for them. But Shakespeare's interesting thing about his process is that he's a very actor-driven playwright, and very strong on commissions. King Lear was written at a time when I think James II or James III, maybe James II, was really worried about combining England, Scotland, Wales. He wanted to put it together and they were separate. There was a whole political turmoil. So he commissioned Shakespeare to write a play. And Shakespeare was fantastic. So he wrote King Lear, which opens with the king saying that I will give my property to one of the three daughters, whoever loves me most. And as you can see, it goes completely wrong. And to make the point at that time that if you divide yourself, it's going to go really bad. So that's how you turn commissions into plays that you want to write. Right? That's the real trick. Then you have plays like Macbeth. There was a lot of bickering in the British monarchy. People were killing each other, like all monarchies do this at some point of time. So the British monarchy hired Shakespeare to write a play which shows them in good light. So obviously this was extremely difficult to show them in good light. So he ended up writing a play which shows the Scottish monarchy in poor light, which automatically qualifies as the British monarchy. So he wrote this thing about Scottish monarchy, and there was actually a king called Macbeth. He was really there and there was nothing wrong with him. He was absolutely alright. But he wrote this play where Macbeth was not the king and he was the general, and you know he has to kill the king and then become all this stuff that happens in Macbeth, the tragedy unfolds, blah blah. So obviously he's really good at spinning this great tale from a very mundane, prosaic commission that is given to him. The other thing about interesting is how he writes for actors. If you read Shakespeare's Fools, you will see this very interesting thing. There was, I think, a period of 3 or 4 years when his theatre was shut down because of the plague in London. So the quality of the Fool after that in the plays completely changed from the quality of the Fools earlier because the actor changed. Before the play, the same actor played the Fool and all, so he had a certain kind of, wit. And after that, that wit changed. So it is believed that chances are very high, of course, that he wrote stuff, but he also asked actors to improvise, and he took stuff from there, and then he wrote it again. And this kind of an iterative process is what made it what it is. So it's improvisation which is crafted, and that becomes kind of a very important thing about Shakespeare's plays. If you move to central part of the world, if you go to Cairo around the medieval times, there was this playwright called Ibn Danyal, who's supposed to be this really anarchic writer of comedy. And it's incredible if you read the medieval plays of Ibn Danyal, because it's so pornographic and it's making fun of Islam, and all the characters there are people from the streets who are taking the the king down, and it's full of sexual innuendos, and it's really like this kind of serious anarchy which you find in Ibn Danyal's plays. And Ibn Danyal did not have a company of actors, so he kind of followed people on the street in quarters where the monarchy or the court writers would not go. He had access to that. So he would go there, he would see these people, and much like later on what we talk about the new wave or the neorealism in French cinema, where you have sort of non-actors playing things and it works. His playwriting was a lot like that. The characters came from real life and they played these roles. There were some clowns who were qualified, who were just actors, and they would fill in when the non-actors would kind of just start talking talking about their own life, in between. So then these guys were filming. But these are phenomenal plays, and his process, as you can see, is extremely different from any of the classical playwrights that we have spoken about so far. Coming back to India again, I want to talk about 3 plays of Tendulkar, Vijay Tendulkar, to illustrate difference in process. The first is the famous play Shantata Court Chalu Hai. Silence, the court is in session. It's been translated in English. Vijay Tendulkar was asked by this theatre group called Avishkar in Bombay to write a play for them. So Vijay Tendulkar said, okay, I'll write a play for you, and they had a deadline. They had to open the play very soon. So he said, okay, but how many people are there in Avishkar? And everybody, if you're in a theatre group and you're getting tea and you're doing stuff, everybody wants a role. So he said, how many people are there? And they said, we have so many women, so many men. So please, you have to write a play for us. So actually, the number of characters in Shantata Court Chalu Hai are the number of people who were in Avishkar at that time. And there was one very strong actress. So they have Binare, who is there. Shilpa Deshpande, she unfortunately died, I think, 2 weeks ago, who was known for this role. So it was written for her, this role, right? So in this case, of course he had a concept, of course he had an idea, he wanted to talk about things. But a lot of things that are used in Shantata Court Chalu Hai are also there in other plays of Tendulkar, in different ways. But here, the demand was such that he was writing it for this group, and of course he was a great writer, so he could come up with such a brilliant play. Then we move to his other classic, which is Ghasiram Kotwal. So at some point of time, the Congress in Maharashtra decided to get in the Shiv Sena, to make the Shiv Sena really, in order to counter the presence of the CPIM in the trade unions. Right? So as long as the CPIM runs the trade union, it's very difficult for Congress to get into that section of society. So they decided to build this Shiv Sena. Now obviously, as we know, Shiv Sena at one point of time became much more powerful than the Congress imagined, and they won their first election of mayor in Pune. And they started bullying the Congress, and the Congress could no longer control Shiv Sena, as the Shiv Sena cannot even control itself right now. So a similar thing happened at that time. And it is a reaction to this, it is in response to this that Tendulkar wrote Ghasiram Kotwal, which is the story of Nana Fadnavis, who is a corrupt head of Pune, which is based on a real story, but obviously he has worked with it, who wants to, who is kind of indulgent and corrupt and so on and so forth, who gets Ghasiram and who wants to sleep with Ghasiram's daughter. So he tells Ghasiram that, okay, you be Kotwal. Ghasiram asks for it, that I want to be Kotwal. He said, okay, you be Kotwal, and I will not interfere in this. I will continue to party. Now what happens is that Ghasiram has a problem with all the so-called Brahmin elite of Pune. So Ghasiram goes after them and he becomes a tyrant who Nana Fadnavis cannot control anymore. And then eventually they have to come together and get rid of Ghasiram. So this analogy was the one that Tendulkar was working with to illustrate that time. The tragedy is that they have not been able to actually get rid of Ghasiram in real life. And then of course we know Sakharam Maina, which is, of course, out of the many great plays, it's one of the other great plays of Tendulkar, which had a completely different process. It is said that he was coming back and he heard some people scream at an alcoholic, or this alcoholic scream at other people in one of the sort of slums of Pune. And then he went back and he started thinking of the story of what would that man's life be like, and looking at society and all the different questions he had, he wrote Sakharam Maina. So in this case, the process is not determined the way it is determined for a group like in Shantata Court Chalu Hai. It is not in response to an immediate political situation like Ghasiram Kotwal, but it is a much more sort of internal solo process than in the other two plays. Yeah? British playwright Carol Churchill wrote very many works. What is very interesting is that she wrote plays which very often were extremely solo endeavors. She took years to write some of her plays when she really didn't even write it for a theatre. She just wrote it and then some theatre took it, which is kind of unusual in England. Because most of the times writers do write for commissions. But at the same time, 2 or 3 of her greatest works are collaborations with dance companies, where she sat in rehearsal with dancers and they worked on a particular theme over months, and she wrote and rewrote and came back, and then the director was there, the choreographer was there, the dancers were there, and all of them put together created this piece whose text was written by her, but its impulses came from the rehearsal room. So if you look at some of her plays which is written solo and some of this work, the process is absolutely different. Yeah. Sadala Vanus was in 1940s in Syria, very important Syrian playwright. And the great thing about Sadala Vanus is he was an incredible satirist. A lot of satire that we know now, the satire of Dario Fo, the satire of Habib Tanvir, which is very Brechtian in one sense, its origins are actually in Sadala Vanus' satire. And Sadala Vanus, I'll give an example. He wrote this incredible play called The Elephant and the King, I think it's called, where there is a group of people who are really tormented by this elephant which has been imposed on them by the king. And every day they are thinking, why on earth has this unruly, ridiculously obese, big elephant been given to us when we really don't know how to control it? So one day, everybody decides, there's a long conversation, and say, we'll go to the palace, we'll storm it, we'll tell the king that you should take the elephant back. And they do this, so everybody gets together, they march to the palace, and they get there, and they're waiting for the king, and of course the king is taking time to come out, and finally when he does, they freeze. They just do not know how to speak to the king because that's not something they're used to. So one of them the king says, what happened? And one of them says, it's about your elephant. So what about my elephant? And somebody else says that it's incredible, we love it. It's an amazing elephant. Then someone else says, yes, and it's the best thing that has happened to us. And so everybody starts praising this elephant. And of course the king thinks that, people like it, so he gives them another one. So now they have to live with these 2 elephants. Alright. And a lot of Sadala Vanus' stuff is based on this kind of satire, where he critiques the people for not standing up to the regime, than the regime for being what it is, because he always believed that the regime is intrinsically nasty. But it's up to the people to kind of do something about it. And then you see, sort of later on you will see there are strands of Sadala Vanus during Lenin and Stalin's time in Russia, when they only wanted this kind of socialist theatre in praise of communism. At that time you have a lot of satire which comes out, which is in the same strand as Sadala Vanus' work. Post Arab Spring, there has been a surge of theatre and playwriting in the entire Arab world, from Syria to Yemen, various other countries. And it's incredible how many of these works are influenced by Sadala Vanus very, very heavily. They're not necessarily adaptations, but people draw from his kind of thinking, his kind of writing, his kind of commenting on the people rather than commenting on the regime. Because what also happened after the Arab Spring is people didn't know what was the alternative. Like, we've toppled the government, but then what? Who's going to come in? Who's going to fill that space? So, in Damascus and in Syria, this is before the ISIS, I'm talking. After the ISIS, many playwrights have just left. Many playwrights. I have had 1 or 2 friends who are Syrian playwrights. This is impossible to work after that. But just between say Arab Spring and the coming in of ISIS, you have plays which are in parking lots, which are in basketball courts, which are in garages. And a lot of them are kind of testimonial plays of what was happening that day, on the day of Arab Spring, on the streets, who came in, what was happening in their houses. So a lot of, in one sense, you can say documentary theatre, but written by playwrights, came out of the Arab world just after Arab Spring, very, very strongly influenced by Sadalavanus. Okay. Finally, we look at a classic example from Karnataka itself. It is said that every year A.K. Ramanujan came down from Chicago every year or every 3 years and gave Karnataka 2 plays by giving Karnataka 1 new story. Right? So Girish Karnad and Chandrasekhar Kambar would meet him, he would tell them a story, and they would both go away with the same story but write 2 completely different plays. Right? And the best example of that is Nagamandala and Siri Sampige. They are based on the same mool story. The main story is the same, and of course they come from very different backgrounds. Karnad was a Rhodes Scholar in mathematics and had a very different kind of education, whereas Kambar was trained in a lot of sort of folk forms and was much more influenced by what was happening in his region. So you see it in the writing. So in Karnad's Nagamandala, and I think the reason why I personally think Girish Karnad is definitely one of the greatest writers that have ever been, because it's very, very difficult to combine this kind of Aristotelian poetics with the sensibility of the traditional storytelling system. And he does that in play after play after play. His basic structure or frame is taken from Yakshagana, is taken from many other, Kathakali and so on and so forth. But the scene work is like the Aristotelian structure. So the scene would have reversals and changes, and every character would have a graph, so on and so forth. Not so many elaborations, but the structure would be that of a Yakshagana or something of that sort. And Kambar's Siri Sampige is much more folk, and you can actually read these 2 plays to see an analysis if you're interested. It's available, of course, in Kannada, but also in English. Both of them have been translated in English, and they are easily available. So it's very easy to get this, right? Okay. So coming back to football, in 1974, the Holland team decided that they are going to play total football, and the idea behind total football was that there's going to be no person who's really fixed in a position. It's going to be a system where you fill in to the field and you play where it's required. So it's chaos. It's not chaos. It's constructed, but you allow for what the team needs at that point of time. And it was one of the most radical and most interesting games that one could watch, because suddenly people didn't know who to mark and who not to mark. And I really like this example of it, because the contemporary theatre is a lot like this. Because we are no longer in a scenario where a playwright is writing is constant. A playwright might be writing in more than 1 languages. A playwright might be influenced by more than 1 thing. Might be writing in different countries. Might be writing in different cities. Might be writing for completely different situations. And might be really interested in different kinds of process to create the next work. Sometimes the playwright is not just thinking of what is my next work, the playwright is also thinking, how will my process be different from what it was earlier? Because that's the real challenge. Sometimes the playwright is not a playwright, sometimes it's 10 actors who are really the playwrights of that piece. Sometimes it's the dramaturg and the director who are deciding because they have a text in their hand. So it's very important, I think, if now, this is just for the geeks, this formation. This is just for people who are absolutely into football. But basically, to move into the field when you are required and how you are required, and not to be fixed in a position. So if the team needs you as a playwright to write something on the 20th day of production, it's open, you guys are talking. I don't think this conception is there anymore that the playwright has gone away to drink whiskey and smoke his cigar, he's not available. That can't be there because the playwright is present, if you're working with contemporary plays. So in one sense, the definition of a playwright, or the role of a playwright, classically has varied from condition to condition, but today I think it's even more dynamic because the same playwright is operating in more than 1 processes, and many of them are the various processes that you saw just now. Yes, so that's my presentation. Thank you very much. We can.